Now okay?
Now okay, now
All
okay.
right. Okay. Sorry about that technical glitch. Okay. Okay. Good morning, dear audience. Thank you for joining us today on this lovely Saturday morning. So I will kick off today's Family Link program with our fourth module titled Crisis Intervention. So I think crisis is a word that gets thrown about a lot on a daily basis. For many of us, we would experience one of these crises at any point of our life. I mean, some of us use the word crisis to represent an identity crisis, a financial crisis, or a midlife crisis, as you would call it. So, what exactly does this term crisis mean to you? If you take a look at the general definition of crisis, a crisis comes to represent an extremely difficult or dangerous point in a situation. But when you zoom in to the mental health perspective, when you talk about a mental health crisis, you are trying to say this is a situation in which a particular person has a behavior which puts them and anyone else at a risk of harm or even preventing this person from being able to care for themselves or to function as they would usually be able to. As the age old saying goes, prevention is always better than cure. So, learning how to handle a crisis is definitely of paramount importance, but even more so than that is actually learning how to identify pre relapse signs. Or, in simpler terms, it's very essential for someone, especially a caregiver of someone with mental illness, to be able to identify or pick up certain cues that indicate there is an impending crisis and try to stop it before it actually progresses to something worse. So, why is it important for us to be able to identify these pre relapse signs or even to handle a crisis well? One of the most essential reason is by preventing the occurrence of these crises or tragedies related to mental illness, we can help to a certain extent overcome the stigma that public have towards people living with mental illness. So a brief introduction. Aggression and self-harm behaviors are not exclusive to people living with mental illness. In fact, if you take a moment to just think about all the various reports of violence, criminal activities that have been reported in the mass media over the past 4 months in this year alone, you would notice that a large majority of these were committed by people who are not exactly suffering from mental illness. However, unfortunately, acts such as this, if committed by those suffering from mental illness, tends to be stigmatized and sensationalized by the media. So the question comes, are people living with mental illness actually associated with higher risk of aggression or self-harm behaviors? Well, the answer is yes, they are associated with a higher risk, but only if their illnesses are not under good control for various reasons, which I would come to in the upcoming slides. So here are some points to ponder over the next few slides. Okay, what comes to your mind when we are speaking about violence committed by people with mental illness? Are you thinking about acts of vandalism, destruction of property, be it your own or that of the public? Or are you thinking about attacks of others, aggression, harming those close to them or the public? Or are you rather thinking of self harm acts or suicide? In the context of this presentation, of course, I'm covering any acts of these violence, including vandalism, harm of others, or even self. Now try to picture yourself in this situation. If by luck, at one day, you are in a situation whereby a person that you live with who is suffering from mental illness happens to turn violent. How do you think you would manage this particular violent situation? Are you likely to try and mediate, or would you strike back, attempt to escape, or would you rather get help from relatives, to call the authorities, or to seek help from mental health professionals and social workers? So what would you likely do? It is good at this point if you can reflect upon yourself how you have managed these situations in the past and how you would do so now, and see if your reaction changes at the end of this presentation. So if you have happened to be in these situations, try to consider, what do you think would have led to those violent outbursts in the past among people suffering with mental illness? Was it an act of provocation, or were they discriminated, causing them to turn violent? Have these patients missed medications? Were they not adequately treated at the point of these violent behaviors? Or perhaps was this violent behaviors secondary to psychotic symptoms they were suffering with, either reacting to hallucinations, or did they have paranoid delusions that someone was trying to harm them and they were simply acting out of defense in their minds? Was it certain life stresses that pushed them off the edge? For example, accumulated debts, unemployment, divorce, everything came and put a lot of pressure upon them, which made them react in a rather unpredictable manner. Or was it an inappropriate response by a loved one or a family member, making them feel slighted? Or coexisting medical conditions which worsened how they were doing? Or perhaps substance influence, making them act out of the norm, out of control, and very unpredictably. After the crisis, after the incident had passed, what would you do? How would be your reaction? Would you choose to talk to the patient, or talk to people who are at the scene, or talk to closest family members, relatives, medical professionals, or social workers at the area? Would your reaction be instead to hide any potential weapons, sharp, dangerous objects, or rather would you monitor their medication compliance closely? If the answer was any one of the above, well, it's a correct answer. Probably a great response would be to do all of the five, all of the six, but not in any particular order. We'll come to that in the next slides. Okay. It is it's a human behavior. I guess it's a natural human behavior. Whenever we observe people who behave strangely, or if you observe any behavior that deviates from so-called normal, these people tend to be labeled, and we tend to look for very simple explanations. And very unfortunately, these strange behaviors are wrongly attributed to mental illness. That is where you get all this wrong terminology being thrown about, calling someone mad, crazy, psycho, which are all very uh, wrong terms which should not be used. And in fact, this kind of attribution is very unfair to people who are actually living with mental illness. As I mentioned before this, most violence happening in the society is in fact by criminals. Most of these acts were committed by someone who had full possession of their mental faculties, who were able to plan their illegal and violent actions. Mentally ill people are usually not violent by nature. So although sometimes some people living with mental illness may show certain violent behaviors, most of these behaviors, if you really look into it, are often their immediate response to certain external triggers, which sort of push them off the edge. If you take a look at this diagram, you would see that the first statement, without treatment, people with schizophrenia and mania are 6 times more likely than someone who is not mentally ill to develop violent behavior. So the take home message from this particular statement is the occurrence of violence in someone with mental illness really depends on whether or not the illness has been well controlled. Thus, one of the most essential points to check on when a patient relapses is do check on their compliance to medications, because poor control of mental illness can predispose them to certain dangerous behaviors, be it violence or self-harm behaviors. Anyone for the matter, be it me or you or members of the public, anyone who is provoked or discriminated against may develop certain violent behaviors. It's a natural human response. So unfortunately, people living with mental illness are more prone, they are more likely to be provoked or discriminated more than others, despite not doing anything wrong. So naturally, this puts them at a predisposition to behave more violently whenever they are provoked or discriminated. So if you notice, this is an external trigger, they are responding to how people treat them. And unfortunately, some of these reactions may be rather tragic or dangerous. So as much as we would try or hope that it would, public fear and their prejudice against mentally ill patients are not going to change overnight. So besides our best effort to advocate for patients' rights, fight against discrimination, another important point that we should not forget is we should try to our best effort to be able to minimize any violent incidents by patients in order to further reassure the public. So where does family members come in this? Do family members have an important role to play? Well, as a matter of fact, very much so, as family members and caregivers are almost always living alongside patients with mental illness. They are so-called the first responders, the first ones who can pick up cues about the patients when they are relapsing. So family members play a very important role. Most of the violent incidents can actually be prevented if family members were able to pick up the cues, look out for very subtle warning signs, and of course be able to handle the crisis when it happens and to naturally seek help in time. You must remember that patients do not intend to be violent. Patients are not criminals. They do not have an intent, they do not plan their actions. But sometimes when they are unable to control themselves, that is when they do rely on family members to support them, to get them the help that they may actually need at that point. So what are the things that family members can do to prevent violence? Number one, and most importantly, develop the awareness of increased risk of violence in uncontrolled mental illness. And I've put it in red. Abandon the wait and see mentality. So like it or not, being Malaysians, it's part of our culture, if you may, that we tend to take things a little bit laid back. We tend to say, relax, we will see. I think it's not too bad. Let's give it some time. So this is okay in most other regards. Nothing wrong with that, except when it comes to mental illness, abandon this mentality completely, because mental illness is something that is very volatile. So something that looks apparently very fine at one moment can suddenly evolve into something that is much more tragic, permanent, and even regrettable. So the moment you notice something is not right, usually your gut feeling will be able to tell you that. That is the moment you need to act. Don't wait, don't postpone. So of course, number 2 and number 3, identify early warning signs. And if at all you happen to miss these warning signs and a full-blown crisis has happened, it's important to learn how to handle this crisis to minimize the possible consequences that may come out of it. To briefly sort of tabulate the kind of dangerous behaviors associated with each mental illness. So a patient of schizophrenia, usually what is the risk of certain dangerous behaviors? They have very high risk of destruction of property or harm of others, especially when their illness are not well controlled. There is also a slightly high risk of self-harm or suicide. Usually this would be secondary to either their prolonged agony, stress due to their mental illness, or they could be reacting secondary to psychosis, such as hallucinations or delusions that they have been having. And of course, there is to a certain extent also a risk of unintentional harm, such as failure to provide appropriate care for the dependent, etc. In a patient suffering of depression, of course, we would most likely want to be concerned, look out for the risk of suicide or self-harm, or even to a certain extent, suicide pact behaviors. Sometimes when depression is very poorly controlled, or we call it a severe depression, they may develop psychotic symptoms. This is when that there may be certain uncontrolled behaviors that also arise, perhaps due to their hallucinations as well. A person in manic depressive disorder or bipolar mood disorder, they are rather prone to be involved in an attack of others, vandalism, or certain reckless activities if their mental illness is not well under control. There is also a risk of suicide or self-injury, especially if they go towards the depressive phase of their illness. So then, who is considered to be belonging to this high-risk group? Who do we want to keep an extra eye on of potential relapse, etc.? Of course, number one, we would think of people who have not yet received a referral or treatment, or those who have reduced or stopped taking medications. As we know, as we had seen in earlier slides, a person with mental illness is only prone to violent or self-harm behaviors if their mental illness is not well under control. And usually medications prescribed, treatment prescribed are all with the intent of keeping certain behaviors in check, be it agitation, aggression, irritability, or suicidal thoughts. All of these are our treatment goals or motives when we start certain medications. So when patients have themselves tapered down or stop taking medications, it puts them at a very high risk of relapse and getting into this sort of dangerous behavior or crisis. Number three, those who are abusing drugs or alcohol. The reason this is dangerous use of illicit substance may be the unfortunate way some people would resort to self-medicate their crisis or their problems. But very unfortunately, not does this only bring about various negative effects upon your physical body, it also puts your mental health at a very unpredictable state. You may act out of control. Many cases that we have seen coming to our psychiatry clinic have had acts of attempted suicide or acts of unprovoked aggression, all due to the effects of being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Those who were aggressive even before the onset of mental illness, someone that was premorbidly rather hot-tempered, prone towards aggression, of course, these people do belong to a higher risk group. And for patients who have had multiple history of relapses in the past due to any of these reasons are also at a higher risk of getting into these violent behaviors. So we have discussed about who is at high risk. Now, what about when is the high risk period? I think in this aspect, it's very easy to list out, because this would be the similar situations that puts anyone, be it someone with mental illness or someone without mental illness, these are so-called described tough periods in your life. So some of these would be encountering stressful life events, either losing a spouse in divorce or death, passing of a loved one, sudden job loss, unemployment or retrenchment. All of these are high risk periods in which, due to sudden loss in income or sudden acute stresses, the patient may be pushed off the edge to carry out certain dangerous, harmful behaviors towards themselves or to their loved ones. Even in the phase when we are transitioning from from an old tried medication to a new medication, this switch also puts them at a risk of relapse, meaning that if at this point of switch they undergo a very stressful life event, chances of them going into a full-blown crisis are much higher, which is why usually when we notice a patient is moving into a more stressful life event, for example, an upcoming exam, or they're going for an interview, or they're about to go through a divorce, any of these life event changes, we would usually recommend the patient to avoid switching to new medications during this phase due to the higher risk of relapse and getting into a crisis. And of course, within 48 hours following a suicidal attempt, this is a very high risk period when you need to be more vigilant, keep an eye out for your loved ones. Because usually, even despite discharge from the hospital, at this setting, the patient is more likely to go into a second attempt at all. If we want to break it down to different types of illnesses, see what is the high risk period for specific illness, though it not necessarily be 100% specific, but most of the time you would notice this sort of pattern. So in patients with schizophrenia, after a discharge from a long stay in an institution back to where they used to live, they may face difficulties to adjust with the new living environment, living with the people that they were far apart from again, and they have new stresses in their life. So this would be a high risk period for people with schizophrenia, putting them at a risk of relapse again. Especially, of course, if their living environment upon discharge is not a very conducive, supportive environment. So you would want to look out for this. For a patient with depression, high risk periods would be following delivery, giving birth, putting them at a high risk of depression or even psychosis for some, or during periods of anniversary of major life events, either going through the birthday of someone that they have been estranged from, or a death anniversary, marriage anniversary. All of these major life events makes them more likely to recall past memories, putting them at a very high risk. And also, of course, during the recovery phase of depressive episodes, when probably we can observe their energy level has sort of improved to a certain extent, but their mood is very much still low, these people are more prone to committing probably dangerous acts of self-harm, or even worse, acts of suicide. For a patient with manic depressive disorder, they are usually at a higher risk of self-harm or suicide, especially from when switching from a manic episode to a depressive episode. Probably for the same reason as before, due to them going into a low mood but still retaining the high energy from the manic episode, they are more likely to commit certain lethal acts of suicide. So what could be the causes of violence when it actually does happen in someone having mental illness? You can divide them very generally into internal and external factors. So what are some of the internal factors? Either it could be psychosis, for example, hallucination, in which they hear certain voices urging them to harm themselves or to attack others, or they develop a paranoia that they are going to be attacked first, so they strike the first blow, simply reacting to the hallucination. So these are some of the internal factors. Or of course, internal feelings of fear, anxiety, doubt, um, responding to people criticizing them, discriminating against them. This could also be an internal factor provoking acts of violence or self-harm. When you look at the external factors, again, as I mentioned, this would be either being at the receiving end of discrimination, mocking, scolding, provoking, nagging. Sometimes when they are under this sort of pressure for a long time, at one day they can just snap and react violently. Also, of course, ambient factors such as a cramped living space, noisy environment, hot temperature, all of them puts them at a higher risk of reacting out of irritability or anger. So when we are going to talk about now about the tips for handling crisis, the first thing that you need to be able to master would be identifying warning signs of aggression. I think this is not too hard to do. We have all been trained since we were young, right? You'll be able to pick up when your mom was mad at you or your teacher was about to snap. It's the similar sort of signs, but probably a little bit at a higher scale. When you see someone who is about to get aggressive, they would first start to portray non-verbal cues, followed by verbal cues, before the full-blown aggressive episode actually occurs. So if you see this representation here, someone who is about to go into a bout of aggression would appear rather nervous, agitated. They would have, their fists clenched, their muscles may be contracted. You can observe that their teeth will be clenched, body may start shivering, even their breathing, if you notice, may start to get rapid. They may start pacing around, and then slowly you can see verbal cues such as verbal warnings, offensive language, vulgarities, profanities may start coming out. So you already know this person is at the very bout of becoming aggressive. So identifying these signs is number one, being very important for you to know this in order to know what will be the next step. So if you look at this diagrammatic representation, you have from the left, highlighted in green, a triggering event leading up to escalation and then crisis and a full-blown rage episode. So the triggering event here is usually certain factors such as non-compliance, poorly treated patient, etc., which brings them to these warning signs of aggression as we saw earlier. With the physical appearance, you start having someone who is swearing, sarcastic, loud, they start pacing. You observe that they may start to become rather demanding, hostile, or even break down into tears. And then you have the escalation of the incidents leading up to a crisis. So this is when things go from um, able to de-escalate to becoming almost difficult or impossible to de-escalate, whereby the person already starts to have a piercing stare, is very angry with profuse perspiration. He or she may start shouting, may start rambling, they may be pounding behavior, or this is where you already start noticing acts of aggression. They would start throwing items, pushing, punching, kicking people around them. So, of course, after this, it may even go to an even bigger full-blown rage where more tragic things can happen. So we preferably don't want it to get to this point whereby you have this window of opportunity between detecting the warning signs and try to seek help at this point to be able to de-escalate the condition without letting it evolve into act of rage. So when you notice the person is already rather agitated, um, getting to be the stage of becoming rather hostile, what are some of the do's and don'ts? So if you look at the blue box, some of the do's in this situation would be to keep yourself very calm, speak to them very slowly in a low, calm tone, use very simple, direct sentences. Encourage the person to express their emotions. Remember to be very friendly. Try to have a good rapport. Reassure them, and also be negotiable to this particular person. Minimize any surrounding stimuli. Turn off the TV. Advise the public to be quiet if possible to avoid further aggravating the person. If possible, hide any sharp, dangerous weapons and always keep an eye out to keep the most vulnerable away from the area. Babies, children, the elderly, and never neglect your own safety. Meaning, it's okay to keep a safe distance in order to be able to react immediately should there be any act of danger. You are encouraged very much to consult doctors, authorities, including police, if you need to at this point. So it's always handy if you have a list of emergency telephone numbers on the standby who you can immediately reach out if needed to. Okay, now we move on to the red box. What you should not do in this situation. Do not scold or provoke the person further. You yourself have to be calm, don't overreact emotionally. Remind yourself that you are treating with someone who is not well. Therefore, you don't need to match their level of aggression. You need to be calm and able to maintain your uh, uh, conscious mind to be able to handle the situation. Don't raise your voice. Don't react in a hostile, threatening manner. Don't stare them down. You don't need to apply any physical control without adequate support. Ensure you have the right people around before you're able to restrain him if necessary. Don't attack the person. Don't make threats. Okay, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to have to bring you for an injection. I'm going to handcuff you. So these sort of threats would further provoke him, which may escalate the situation further. Please, whenever someone is in relapse and cannot be persuaded to seek medical help. So sometimes you may be worried, oh, what if I call the police and by the time they reach here, he or she is okay? Wouldn't that be embarrassing? Well, don't be embarrassed. Don't worry about wasting the police time. Even though the patient had already become calm by the time the police comes, they are no longer posing an immediate danger. That's all right. Better to be safe than sorry. Because sometimes these situations can escalate beyond your control, and you will be glad that you didn't hesitate to call the necessary authorities while you had the window of opportunity. After the crisis, make sure to review what had happened, analyze its cause, in order to prevent a similar occurrence over and over again in the future. If you realize that it was probably due to patients' poor adherence to medication, you it is time patient back for their consultation, discuss what would be a better alternative to improve their compliance to medications. Early signs of relapse, as we seen earlier, whenever a patient starts to turn violent, starts to commit acts of self-harm, you should understand that these are often already indicators of the mental illness relapsing. So when we identify these early warning signs of relapse, you can predict already and prevent any further dangerous behaviors from happening. So usually when you ensure people with mental illness receive the appropriate treatments in the appropriate time, relapse can be prevented. So what are some of the changes before relapse that you can observe in a patient with mental illness? There would be very general signs, some of them obvious, some of them not very. For example, their sleeping pattern may start to be altered. They either have difficulty falling asleep, or they awaken many times throughout the night, wake up very early in the morning. Changes in their daily habits or routine, or you start observing certain disorganized or abnormal behaviors. They start talking to themselves, laughing to themselves, gesturing, or they appear to be rather suspicious or sensitive to things that they normally are not, or changes in their general appearance. Do they look rather unkempt? Their hygiene's not very well maintained, or is their speech becoming rather irrelevant, or appearing to describe certain things such as I don't want to live anymore. If they start mentioning these kind of things, you know that there's an impending relapse. If you look at individual illnesses, schizophrenia, depression, and mania, each one would usually have very different signs in an impending relapse. If you take the far left column, someone with schizophrenia, usually when they are going into a relapse, they would start becoming paranoid. They may want to withdraw from people, relatives or loved ones, fearing to take food prepared for them. They're rather suspicious. Their concentration may be impaired. If they are working, bosses would start to complain. Their work performance is not so good. And they may start shouting or using rather harsh language. Or, of course, you can observe the emergence of psychosis, such as they start complaining that they're hearing voices that are not actually there, or complaining that they can see objects that are not actually there. Or in general, you notice that they are starting to have difficulties communicating with family members, whereby they start to withdraw from family members, rather hostile towards them. Other changes you can observe in terms of their appearance, they would neglect self-hygiene, neglect their self-appearance in general. Their speech may also become rather irrelevant, may lack logic or sense. They may sometimes even avoid social meetings altogether, always appear to be rather depressed and in low spirit. For a person who is going into a relapse of depression, you observe from the top, you see there's a loss of appetite. They don't eat as they usually do, or sometimes on the other extreme, they may eat more than they usually do. They start keep complaining that they have a sense of worthlessness. You notice that they don't really enjoy things that they used to, and you observe that the thoughts of self-harm or the theme of death is very prominent in these people. Hobbies, friends, things that they used to love no longer interest them. They may indulge in substance such as alcohol, or sometimes, and especially in the certain patients, their depression may take a different sort of presentation, whereby they start to complain about various body complaints. For example, I'm having a headache, a muscle ache, this doesn't feel right, that doesn't feel right. So usually there's no apparent physical cause, but you notice they have multiple complaints. This be an indication of a relapse in their symptoms as well. Someone with impending mania, this would be the other extreme, whereby you notice their energy level is more than usual. They're rather overexcited, overactive, start to talk more than usual, very fast speech, jumping from one topic to the other, sometimes even lacking a logic connection. They start to be absent from classes or work, and also they may have difficulties in communicating with family members. So when you do notice these sort of signs coming up, what do? You take action. That's most important. Once you've identified signs of relapse, number one, contact the psychiatric outpatient clinic that's treating the patient as soon as possible. Even if your appointment is in 2 days or 2 weeks' time, don't wait until the appointment. Call there and then and see them there and then, because you never know when a full-blown relapse or something more tragic may happen if you postpone. So arrange for early follow-up or consultation. If the patients don't cooperate, try to seek the help of other authorities. As you can see, if the patient is uncooperative in the early stage of crisis, there are resources for you to seek help. Either you have social workers who can help you out, mental health NGOs who can bring your patients to seek consultation. Of course, if the patient himself finds himself in impending relapse, he can always approach the doctor to arrange for hospitalization, especially for someone who is suffering from major depression. If you notice yourself having strong suicidal tendencies, bring yourself immediately to see a doctor. So talking about preventing suicide, who are at risk of having suicidal thoughts? Well, in actuality, you can't really tell. Oftentimes we underestimate, I think, the risk of suicide in people. For example, you see here Robin Williams. I think he was known to many for being someone who spreads cheer. He used to make people laugh. But in fact, one fine day, Williams was one who had unfortunately died of suicide as well. So, but particular people who have a higher risk of having the suicidal thoughts will be people who are suffering from major mental illness, especially when they go into relapse. And if you notice someone has actually made previous suicidal attempts or who have had family history of suicide, you need to be more vigilant in this group of people, because it just puts them at that much of a higher risk than the rest in having suicidal thoughts. So do people who attempted suicide really want to die? Well, actually, suicide, if you see, is in fact really a plea of help, which cannot be overlooked. Most of the time, you see, 80% of those who attempted suicide in the past had actually disclosed their suicidal ideas to others, either explicitly or implicitly, before actually making the attempt. So the more detailed the plan, the higher the risk of suicide. So the moment anyone you know, a loved one or a friend, or you yourself, start to have an inkling of suicidal thoughts, start to mention thoughts of death, don't wait, act now. Seek professional help to get yourself or your loved ones out of that phase of danger. If we want to look at the sort of some facts, suicide rate in men and women, although more women than men have attempted suicide, men do have a higher suicide rate, meaning more men actually die by suicide compared to women, because men tend to use more lethal methods. But having said that, whether you're a woman or a man, if you have any of these sort of thoughts, never hesitate to come forward to seek help and to get to know how we can better improve your current condition. So think someone you know, be it a co-worker, a friend, or how do you approach them? Because this can be quite a difficult topic. Sometimes you even want to refrain from talking about it at all. You may consider it taboo. But in fact, sometimes it's best if you can do certain assessment as a preliminary assessment of his or her suicide risk to decide what would be the next step of action. Ask them simple questions such as, how's your appetite recently? Have you been sleeping well? Do you mind sharing? Have you lost hope on something? Do you feel there's something in your life that cannot be improved? So what's your plan in dealing with this particular situation? Has it ever crossed your mind of ending your life? If the person says yes, they have had a suicidal ideation, you can probe gently a little bit. Is the suicidal thought there only that once, or is it there all the time? Have you come up with any detailed suicidal plans? And then if you have established enough of a rapport and you're able to further get them to open up, you can ask further detailed questions. So when or where have you been planning to carry out the suicide? Did you write any note? Did you bid farewell to anyone? How important is he or she to you? So by asking these questions, you have somehow evaluated the risk of suicide, which you can communicate to the treating mental health professional, which will really help in terms of treatment in the future. This is a misconception that is there in most people. Talking about suicide does not increase the risk of suicide. So don't be afraid to discuss about suicidal ideas. Certain family members who have come for consultation at the clinic would tell the doctor, please don't mention the word suicide. I don't want to remind them. This is a misconception. So sometimes direct inquiry about suicidal idea actually allows people with suicidal ideas to open up in order to seek help. And if we can actually detect the suicidal idea is present, then we can take further caution to prevent it from actually happening. So once again, if you find that someone has a specific suicidal plan or determined suicidal idea, please seek help from doctors or professional counselors. If from your preliminary assessment, if you notice the risk of suicide is not particularly high at the moment, then you can help him or her to draw up what they call as a contingency plan. Meaning, if the suicidal idea does turn more serious in the future, what do we do? Contact a counselor, contact a NGO, someone who is caring for them as soon as possible to bring them to see a doctor. Okay, sometimes for a person who is highly suicidal or having suicidal thoughts, simply providing a counseling hotline may be a thoughtful idea, but it may be inadequate to save lives. Because usually when a person is already at the brim of suicide or having suicidal ideas, these people often lack motivation to actually seek help through hotlines. So sometimes you need to go that extra mile for them. You need to accompany the person to seek help. You need to gently sort of prod them to go further. Sometimes in serious cases, you may even need to urge them to see the doctor, seek medical treatment, or even later on after treatment, help them to rebuild their support networks. Either get them to join a religious group or to join a counseling group, any group where you have support network of people able to sort of informally keep an eye out for this person. Coming to the last few slides, this is just something to ponder upon. Mental health is something that is much talked about, especially these days. Um, this is not a sign of weakness when you're talking about mental health. It's not shameful. This is something that everyone has, and it's very important, and it's very worth making time for. Mental health is really part of being human, and never feel embarrassed for looking after your own mental health. It can be complex, it can be changeable, but most importantly, it is real. So never feel that mental health is something that you can snap out of, something that you are faking, something that is uh, you get to decide about. Mental health is different uh, uh, from what is said to be all in your mind. So take full possession of your mental health, treat your mental health with love and care, then you would have a better quality of life and further be able to function very well in all areas of your life, be it family, a job, or relationships. Lastly, if you see this hierarchy of mental health needs, although it's written in a hierarchy, really all of these levels need an almost equal level of importance. Every one of us needs a little bit of support, treatment, good sleep, healthy relationships to support us, self-compassion, self-care, empathy, humor, hope, and rest are all very important components in order for us to live day by day, to get through our daily stresses and to be able to cope with it and come out as a trooper at the end of it all. But if at any point of time you feel yourself breaking down, you're unable to get some time off for yourself, you feel that you are lacking self compassion, you have got no one else to turn to, always seek treatment so we can treat you back to your best version of your mental health. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you for your attention for this time. Pass it back to the chairperson. Thank you.
Okay.